Maria Brooks stood in a crowded courtroom, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on her, her hands clenched at her sides and her jaw tight. As she stared straight ahead, the judge was talking to her, but she barely heard his words. The world around her seemed to blur into the background of white walls and wooden paneling. His voice became muffled as her own heartbeat filled her ears. Judge Stephen Whittaker had made it clear from the moment she stepped inside that he was in no mood for patience or compassion. He was going to make an example out of her, and in that moment, she realized it didn't matter what she said, or that she had already lost his favor before she even opened her mouth. His tone was condescending and dismissive as he explained the fine for her traffic violation, a minor issue that any reasonable person would have understood was a simple mistake. Maria had been rushing that morning, juggling the demands of her job and family. But it didn't matter. Her time was not important in this courtroom where the rules were often unfair and the scales of justice did not always balance. The judge gave his decision firmly as though he had already determined her guilt before she even spoke. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. The fine was significant, and though she had the means to pay it, the injustice of it stung deeply. This wasn't about the money, it was about the principle of it all, the unfairness of a white judge handing down a harsh punishment to a black woman in a town where people like her were often overlooked or dismissed. Without thinking, she spoke out, her voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I believe this is unjust. It was a simple mistake, a mistake that doesn't warrant such a heavy fine. She could see the slight flicker of irritation in the judge's eyes, but she didn't back down. I understand the rules, but they should apply fairly and equally to everyone, regardless of who they are. Judge Whittaker's face hardened at her words. He had heard enough, and in a sharp voice, he cut her off. You will respect this court, Maria, he said, and the words stung more than any fine could. It was not just his tone, but the implied reminder that she was at his mercy in this space, a black woman who dared to speak up. The tension in the room thickened as the judge continued his reprimand. Maria could feel the eyes of the people in the gallery boring into her, her frustration boiling over. But she kept her posture erect. She had fought too hard for respect in her life to let anyone see her falter. She could feel the anger rising in her chest, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. When the gavel finally came down, it felt like a final blow, and she quickly left the stand, the weight of the fine heavy on her shoulders, but the sting of the injustice even heavier. Her steps were slow and deliberate. As she made her way out of the courtroom, the whispers of the other attendees felt like 1,000 judgmental stares. They would never understand how she felt, how she had been made to feel small in that moment, how she had been punished for simply standing up for herself. As she walked out the door, she told herself she wouldn't let this define her, but deep down, she knew it wasn't just about the fine. It was about something much bigger. It was about a system that constantly made her feel like she had to work twice as hard to prove her worth. Maria Brooks had spent years building a reputation that defied the odds in a town where people of her background were often overlooked or underestimated. She was a mediator, known for her ability to calmly resolve disputes that others couldn't. Whether it was a family feud, a business disagreement, or a community dispute, Maria had a way of bringing people together, even in the most tense situations. Her reputation had taken time to cultivate, but over the years, she had become a trusted figure in the town, a neutral party that both sides of an argument could rely on. But the courtroom incident with Judge Whittaker made her question everything. The harsh fine and the dismissive attitude from the judge brought all the old wounds of prejudice back to the surface. Maria had faced these kinds of challenges before, being passed over for promotions because of her race, being talked down to in meetings by people who didn't believe she belonged in the room. But this felt different. She had never felt so publicly humiliated, especially by someone in power. It was as if all her years of hard work, all her professional accomplishments, were irrelevant in the face of a system that seemed to care more about her skin color than her abilities. She sat in her small office late that evening, staring at the stack of paperwork in front of her. The case she had just wrapped up, a mediation between two local families over a piece of property, had gone smoothly. She was proud of how she handled it, guiding both parties to a resolution that they could agree on. But now her mind kept drifting back to the judge's words. They echoed in her head, and each time they did, the anger built up again. How dare he? How dare he assume she was anything less than professional simply because she disagreed with him? Maria stood up and walked over to the window of her office. The town outside was quiet now, the streets empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching her. It wasn't just the judge who had looked down on her. It was the whole system, the subtle biases that existed in every corner of this small town. She had spent her life trying to prove that she was just as capable as anyone else, and yet, time and time again, she had been reminded that her race was something people couldn't ignore. But there was more at stake now. Her reputation as a mediator had always been tied to the trust the community placed in her. If people started to believe she wasn't capable of handling disputes simply because of one incident, everything she had worked for could come crashing down. She couldn't afford to let that happen. Her phone buzzed, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Ava, a local business owner who had been one of her first clients. Ava had always been one of Maria's strongest supporters. The message read, "Asterisk, I heard what happened today. I just want you to know that people are talking, and they know who you really are. Don't let them tear you down. You're the best at what you do, asterisk." Maria smiled at the message, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Not everyone in the town saw her as the judge had. There were still people who respected her work, who understood the value she brought to the community. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to remind her why she did what she did. Still, the question lingered. How would she move forward from this? Could she continue to mediate with the same confidence, knowing that one person's opinion had almost destroyed everything she had built? Maria knew that in order to survive, she had to rise above it. She would prove herself again and again, not just to the town, but to herself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Maria had always known that the fight for respect would never be simple, and she wasn't about to back down now. The weeks following the courtroom incident were a blur for Maria. Everywhere she went, whispers followed her. At the local coffee shop, a quiet murmur would ripple through the crowd when she walked in. People exchanged looks when her name came up in conversation. Maria knew it wasn't just about the fine anymore. It was about the story that had been spun around her. The judge's harsh ruling had turned into something bigger, a symbol of the way her success and authority were often questioned because of her race. The fine had been a trigger, an event that exposed the fractures in the community that Maria had tried so hard to ignore. Her work as a mediator, once respected by all, had now become clouded by doubt. Maria had always prided herself on her ability to stay neutral, to rise above conflict, and help others find common ground. But now she could sense that people were second-guessing her. Clients who had once been eager to work with her now hesitated. A prominent local lawyer called to cancel a mediation session that had been scheduled for weeks. He claimed that another mediator was available and better suited for the job. She knew it wasn't about the case. It was about the reputation she'd just been branded with. Ava, the business owner who had sent her the encouraging text, had called a few times to check in. She urged Maria to stay strong and not let the community's opinions affect her work. But even Ava's encouragement wasn't enough to fully block out the weight of the whispers, the stares, and the quiet judgments that were making her feel like an outsider in her own town. Each cancellation felt like a blow, and each empty call felt like a further erosion of her credibility. One afternoon, as Maria was reviewing some paperwork for a future mediation, she got a call from an old friend, Benjamin, who worked as a paralegal at the local law office. His voice sounded urgent on the other end of the line. "Maria, I'm not sure if you've heard, but there's been a lot of talk about the fine. People are starting to pick sides. Some are saying the judge had it out for you from the start. Others are defending him. It's all over the place." Maria sighed, rubbing her temples. She had heard similar things from other people, but hearing it from Benjamin made it all feel more real. "I can't control what people say, Ben. I'm just trying to keep my head down and do my job." "I know, but that's just it," he said. "People are questioning whether you're fit for your work now, and it's affecting your reputation. If you want to clear this up, you need to address it head on." Maria sat in silence for a moment. Her heart raced as she processed his words. She had always been the one to resolve conflicts, to bring peace, but now she was the one facing a crisis. She had spent years fighting for respect, and now it felt like it was slipping away. Could she address this head on? Was it even possible to fix her reputation after what had happened in that courtroom? That evening, as she sat in her office, her phone rang again. This time, it was a new client, a couple seeking mediation services for a family dispute. Maria hesitated, unsure if they had heard the rumors or if they were even willing to give her a chance. After a long pause, she answered the call. The couple introduced themselves and expressed their desire for a calm, neutral party to help them with a delicate issue. They mentioned they had heard about her work and trusted her based on her reputation. For the first time in days, Maria felt a small spark of hope. Maybe not everyone had turned against her. Maybe, just maybe, she could start rebuilding, one case at a time. But she knew that it wouldn't be easy. She had to prove herself again, not just to the town, but to herself. Judge Stephen Whittaker sat at his desk, staring blankly at the pile of cases in front of him. His mind kept drifting back to Maria Brooks, to that day in the courtroom when he had made his decision to fine her. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He had been harsh, too harsh. There had been something in her demeanor that day, a calmness, a confidence that had unsettled him. But it wasn't just her defense of herself. It was the way she had stood her ground, speaking with the kind of authority he hadn't expected from a woman like her. And the way the room had seemed to shift when she spoke, how the air thickened with tension, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath. He had seen the look on her face when he handed down the fine, the quiet anger, the silent defiance. But what troubled him the most was the way he felt afterwards. It wasn't the victory of a judge upholding the law. It was an overwhelming sense of doubt. Was he right to treat her that way? Had his frustration clouded his judgment? Judge Whittaker had always prided himself on being fair, even-handed. He'd spent years climbing the ladder of the justice system, trying to build a reputation as someone who was tough but fair. Yet now, the image of Maria's face, calm but unyielding, kept coming back to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had wronged her. He had made the decision swiftly, but something about it didn't sit right. He had seen her around town. She was a mediator, known for resolving disputes in the community. He had heard people speak of her with respect. But that day in court, he hadn't seen the woman who helped resolve conflicts. He had seen someone challenging his authority, and he reacted as many in his position did, with power. The nagging feeling of guilt wouldn't go away. And then came a letter from a local lawyer, a colleague from the legal circles, recommending Maria for an upcoming mediation in one of his own cases. In the letter, the lawyer praised her work as a mediator, calling her impartial, insightful, and able to bring peace to even the most complicated situations. The letter emphasized her importance to the community, her reputation for fairness, and her commitment to helping people reach resolutions without the need for litigation. The more Judge Whittaker read, the more he felt a rising sense of discomfort. He had dismissed her without knowing her, assuming she was just another person looking to skirt the system. But in reality, she was someone who was actively making the community better, who was solving problems while he was stuck in the rigid confines of the courtroom. His discomfort grew into something deeper, embarrassment, perhaps even shame. He had misjudged her, and now, in the cold light of reflection, he was forced to confront the reality that his actions had been driven by something other than justice. He couldn't deny it anymore. He had been wrong. The realization hit him hard, but it also sparked something else, a sense of responsibility. He couldn't let this injustice stand. He needed to fix this, but how? The town was already buzzing with rumors about the fine, and he had no doubt that Maria was feeling the effects of it. It was clear that she wasn't just another person trying to avoid the consequences of her actions. She was someone who deserved respect, not only as a professional, but as a person. The next few days passed in a blur for Judge Whittaker. He spent his evenings reflecting on his decision, researching Maria's work as a mediator, and even talking to colleagues who had worked with her in the past. It became abundantly clear that he had made a mistake, and he knew that the only way to correct it was to admit that mistake, to apologize, publicly if necessary, and begin the long road to repairing the damage he had done. He could already imagine the scene, standing before her, offering an apology, but he knew words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to show her and the community that he had learned something valuable from this experience. and he knew that the first step would be acknowledging that he had failed her. He wasn't sure how Maria would respond, but he knew one thing for sure. It was time to make things right. The opportunity for Judge Whittaker to make things right came sooner than he expected. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when a case landed on his desk that would turn out to be anything but ordinary. A local family, the Hendersons, had been embroiled in a bitter feud over property boundaries. The dispute had dragged on for months, with both sides stubbornly refusing to back down, and now it had come to the judge's courtroom. The tension was palpable, and it was clear that neither party was interested in an amicable resolution. Neither side seemed open to compromise, and the likelihood of a courtroom battle seemed inevitable. As Judge Whittaker sifted through the case files, a thought flickered in the back of his mind. He knew this dispute needed something more than legal rulings and forceful orders. The Hendersons had been stuck in this cycle of animosity for far too long, and no amount of ruling from him would change that. What they needed was someone who could help them see the bigger picture, someone who could break through the walls of their stubbornness and guide them toward a resolution. That's when Maria's name came to mind. He hadn't seen her since that fateful day in court, but her reputation as a mediator was well known in the community. Her ability to diffuse tension, to see things from both sides and find common ground, was legendary. He hadn't been ready to admit it before, but now he understood that he needed her. The problem wasn't just the case itself. It was his own failure to recognize her worth and her potential. Without wasting another moment, Judge Whittaker made the call. He didn't know how Maria would respond, but he hoped she would agree to mediate the case. He was nervous, unsure of how she would view him after everything that had transpired. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Hello, Maria Brooks," she said, her voice warm but measured, as if waiting for him to get to the point. "Miss Brooks, this is Judge Stephen Whittaker," he began, his voice steady but laced with the unease he felt. "I know we've had our differences, and I want to be upfront with you. I was wrong in my judgment of you. I realize now that my actions in court were unfair, and I want to make it right." There was a brief silence on the other end. Maria didn't say anything for a moment, and Judge Whittaker could almost hear her weighing his words. Then, to his surprise, she spoke calmly. "I appreciate your honesty, Judge Whittaker. It's not easy for someone in your position to admit when they've made a mistake." He felt the weight lift from his chest, but he knew this was just the beginning. "I know this may be difficult, but I need your help with a case. The Henderson family has a property dispute, and it's reached a point where I believe they could benefit from your mediation expertise. They're stuck, and no matter how many rulings I give, it's clear that they won't reach a resolution on their own." Maria paused again, and Whittaker could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. After what felt like an eternity, she responded. "I'll do it," she said simply, though there was no hiding the professionalism in her tone. "But I need you to understand this. It's not just about fixing what happened between us. If I'm going to help this family, I need to know you're genuinely committed to fair mediation and are willing to give up some control." "I understand," he said quickly, almost desperately, "and I promise you I'm committed. You have my word." The relief that washed over him was almost overwhelming. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing the right thing. He wasn't just trying to fix a mistake. He was taking the first step in making meaningful change. Judge Whittaker knew that this was just the beginning, that his actions would need to match his words. But this was the first moment in a long time that he felt like he could truly make a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of those around him. The next day, Maria arrived at the courthouse for the mediation session. The Hendersons were already there, sitting tensely across from one another. Judge Whittaker watched from a distance, noticing the change in himself. He was no longer standing behind a gavel, judging from a distance. Instead, he was a participant in the process, working alongside Maria. As she began to speak, her calm voice filled the room, and it wasn't long before the tension began to melt away. She was doing what she did best, guiding, listening, and creating space for resolution. Judge Whittaker silently marveled at the way Maria handled the situation. She was a master of her craft, and as the Hendersons finally reached a peaceful agreement, he felt a flicker of hope for the future. a future where he could not only learn from his past mistakes but grow as a judge, a person, and perhaps even as an ally to someone like Maria. The mediation with the Henderson family marked a turning point for both Judge Whittaker and Maria. The case had been resolved swiftly, far quicker than either party had expected, and with far less friction than Whittaker had anticipated. Maria's approach had been gentle but firm, and she had brought a sense of calm into a space that was previously filled with animosity. The Hendersons, who had been unable to find common ground for months, were now shaking hands, thanking each other, and moving forward with an agreement. It was nothing short of miraculous, and Judge Whittaker couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. After the mediation, Whittaker quietly thanked Maria. He was still reeling from the fact that he had reached out to her in the first place, but now he was deeply grateful that she had agreed to help. He watched as she left the courtroom, her presence so calm, so assured that it almost seemed as though she was leaving the room in the same peaceful state she had created within it. There was a quiet pride in her every step. For the first time in months, Whittaker didn't feel the familiar weight of judgment on his shoulders. Instead, he felt a small flicker of hope for the future. That evening, as Maria walked to her car, she felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and contemplation. The mediation had gone well, but it was still hard to shake the experience with Judge Whittaker. She hadn't expected him to reach out, and when he had, she had been unsure how to approach the situation. She had been so focused on her own struggle, trying to rebuild her reputation and prove herself in a town that often doubted her, that she hadn't considered the possibility of reconciliation with the judge. But now that she had done it, helped him, helped the Hendersons, it felt like something more, something important. The road to this point hadn't been easy. Maria had been forced to confront the biases that existed within her own community, but she had persevered. She wasn't about to let one bad experience define her. She had worked too hard for too long to let the unfairness of a courtroom interaction take away what she had built. But helping the Hendersons, and especially seeing the judge's transformation, gave her hope. It was a reminder that change could happen, even in the most unlikely places. Over the next few weeks, Maria noticed a shift in the way people treated her. The whispers that had once followed her through town had quieted. People were starting to come to her again, seeking her help with mediations, asking for her advice. It wasn't just the community members who had always trusted her. Even those who had once doubted her were now willing to listen. Word had spread about the success of the Henderson mediation, and suddenly, Maria's reputation as a mediator was stronger than ever. The judge's gesture had given her an unexpected validation, one that she hadn't known she needed. But she wasn't the only one who had changed. Judge Whittaker, too, seemed different. His colleagues noticed the subtle transformation in him. He became more open to hearing other perspectives, especially when it came to those who had been historically marginalized or dismissed by the system. He had begun to attend town meetings, listening to the concerns of the local Black community, something he had never done before. People started to whisper about him in a different way. He wasn't just the stern judge behind the bench anymore. He was someone who had been willing to look at his own flaws and make an effort to learn. The true measure of their unlikely partnership came one afternoon when Whittaker made the decision to publicly apologize to Maria. Standing in front of a group of local professionals at a community gathering, he spoke about the mistakes he had made, about his failure to see Maria's worth when she stood before him in the courtroom. He acknowledged his biases, the assumptions he had held, and how he had learned from them. He credited Maria for her willingness to offer him a chance at redemption. It was a powerful moment, one that left many in the room speechless. Maria was there, standing off to the side, watching the judge with a mixture of surprise and pride. She had never imagined that this day would come, that Judge Whittaker would stand before a crowd and own up to his past mistakes. But it was happening, and it was more than she could have hoped for. She didn't need his apology, not really. But for the town, for the community, it meant something. It meant that change was possible. It meant that even in the most unlikely circumstances, people could learn, grow, and heal. As the crowd applauded, Maria's gaze met the judge's, and for the first time, there was a quiet understanding between them. They had both been through something difficult, something painful, but they had come out of it better, better people, better professionals, and hopefully better allies to each other. And as they both walked away from that gathering, they knew their journey was far from over. But they also knew they were no longer alone in the fight. The following months were filled with a sense of cautious optimism for both Mariah and Judge Whittaker. The town had begun to embrace the idea that change was possible. Maria's work as a mediator was flourishing again, but this time it came with a deeper respect from the community. Clients who had hesitated to hire her before were now seeking her out, confident that her work was not only effective but rooted in fairness. Maria felt more visible, but more importantly, she felt seen for who she truly was, someone who could bridge divides, who could bring people together in ways that left lasting impacts. She had proved her worth not just to the community but to herself. Judge Whittaker, too, was adjusting. The apology had opened a door between them, one that allowed him to learn from Mariah and reconsider the rigid perspectives he had once held. He was now regularly attending town meetings where discussions about racial justice and equity took center stage. People were noticing the shift in his demeanor. He no longer sat behind his bench with the same air of untouchable authority. Instead, he engaged with his community, listened to their concerns, and made it clear that he was committed to changing the way he viewed justice. But it was clear to both him and Mariah that their paths had forever been altered by that one moment in the courtroom. One chilly afternoon, as winter settled over the town, Maria received an invitation to speak at a local event on conflict resolution. The event was organized by the town's Chamber of Commerce, and it was clear that they had recognized her growing influence. When she read the invitation, her first instinct was to decline. The spotlight wasn't something she sought, especially given the emotional toll she had experienced over the last few months. But after a moment's hesitation, she decided that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for, not just to speak about her profession, but to remind people of the power of healing and reconciliation. The evening of the event, the room was packed. Local business owners, community leaders, and even a few curious residents had gathered to hear her speak. Maria felt a knot in her stomach as she stepped onto the stage, but she steadied herself. She was not the same person who had once walked into that courtroom. She was stronger, more certain of her purpose. She began by sharing her personal story, the challenges she had faced as a Black woman in a predominantly white community, the battles she had fought to be seen as equal, and the ways that bias and discrimination had shaped her professional journey. But she didn't dwell on the hurt or the anger. Instead, she spoke about the lessons she had learned along the way, about the importance of listening, of being open to change, and most importantly, of extending empathy to others. She spoke about how reconciliation wasn't just about resolving conflicts, it was about acknowledging the pain, the history, and the shared humanity that connected everyone. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, she felt truly heard. The audience was rapt, some nodding in agreement, others quietly reflecting. As she wrapped up her speech, there was a long pause before the applause began. It wasn't a polite, perfunctory applause. It was deep and genuine, a recognition not just of her work, but of the courage it took to be vulnerable, to share so much of herself. As the event came to a close, Judge Whittaker approached her. She had been expecting him, but even so, his presence caught her off guard. He smiled, a small but sincere gesture. "You were incredible, Mariah. That was one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard." Maria smiled back, a little hesitant but grateful. "Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that." He paused, his expression shifting slightly. "I want you to know, I've learned a lot from you, from the mediation we did together and from the way you've handled everything. I was blind to a lot of things, but you've shown me the importance of really listening, not just to words, but to what people are feeling." Maria looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the title, the man who had made mistakes, but was willing to confront them, willing to change. There was no more judgment, no more defensiveness, only humility. "It means a lot to hear you say that," Maria replied, her voice steady. "But it's not just about me. It's about all of us, learning from each other, and doing the hard work to make this place better." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but the unspoken understanding between them lingered. As they parted ways that evening, Maria realized something profound. The town was changing, not because one person had made a stand, but because many people from different walks of life had come together and chosen to listen, to learn, and to grow. And though there was still work to be done, the seeds of change had already been planted. Maria's journey had been long, full of struggles and setbacks, but it was clear that the path forward, though not easy, was one that she was now walking with purpose, with the support of a community that had, at last, recognized her true worth. As spring began to thaw the chill of winter, Judge Whittaker stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, staring out over the town square. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the familiar buildings, yet everything felt different. The landscape of his community had shifted, the air now filled with the possibility of real change. It had been several months since Mariah's speech, and Whittaker knew that her words had left a lasting mark on not just the town, but on him. He was no longer the man who had made snap judgments based on preconceived notions. He had become something else, more aware, more engaged, and more connected to the people around him. The town had changed in other ways too. There was a new spirit of cooperation in the air. The ongoing dialogue about justice, fairness, and equality had expanded beyond the walls of the courthouse and into the community. Conversations were happening in places where they had never occurred before, at town meetings, in local businesses, and even in the homes of families who had once felt marginalized. There was a growing recognition that real justice meant something beyond legal decisions. It meant listening, acknowledging the past, and working together to build a more equitable future. Maria, too, had noticed the difference. As her mediation work continued to thrive, she found that more people were coming to her, not just seeking her help with personal conflicts, but looking to her for guidance on how to navigate the broader issues facing the community. She had become a trusted leader, someone people knew could not only resolve disputes, but also help them see each other's perspectives. Even though she had always been driven by a desire to help others, she now realized how much her presence had grown in the town. It wasn't just about mediating conflicts anymore, it was about making real, lasting change. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when old tensions resurfaced, when people clung to their biases, when the weight of history seemed too much to bear. But each time, Maria found herself using the tools she had learned, not just as a mediator, but as a human being with a heart full of empathy, listening carefully, and reminding people of their shared humanity. One evening, after a particularly difficult mediation session, Maria sat in her office, reflecting on how far she had come. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She recognized the number. Judge Whittaker. "Hello," she answered, her voice calm but curious. "Maria, I just wanted to check in," Judge Whittaker said, his voice steady but warm. "I've been thinking about our conversations, about everything we've learned from each other. I wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance, for showing me a different way to do this job. I'm not sure I would have made it this far without your guidance." Maria felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had never expected this level of appreciation from him, especially after everything that had happened between them. "Judge Whittaker, you've done the hard work," she said. "You've made the choice to change. That's what matters, but I appreciate your words. It means a lot." There was a pause on the line, and then Whittaker spoke again. "There's something else I want to ask you. We're planning a community forum on justice and reconciliation next month. We've invited local leaders from all backgrounds, and I would be honored if you would be one of the keynote speakers. It feels right, given everything that's happened." Maria's heart swelled at the invitation. She had spoken in many places, but this felt different. This wasn't just another event. It was a chance to bring the community together in a meaningful way, to continue the work they had started. To show that change, no matter how difficult, was possible. "I would be honored," she said, her voice steady with conviction. "Thank you, Judge." As they ended the call, Maria sat back in her chair, her thoughts racing. She had come so far, from the woman who had stood before a judge who had dismissed her, to the mediator who had helped her community find common ground. And now she was being asked to take her place as a leader in the very community that had once tried to silence her. The next month, as Maria stood on the stage at the community forum, she looked out at the crowd. Judge Whittaker sat in the front row, his face a mixture of pride and quiet reflection. The room was filled with people from every walk of life, their eyes focused on her as she spoke about the power of listening, of healing, and of working together for a better future. She spoke not just as a mediator, but as someone who had lived through the struggles, someone who had seen firsthand the importance of empathy and understanding. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, and as the event came to a close, the applause was deafening. But it wasn't just for her. It was for the town, for the community that had come together to heal, to learn, and to grow. As Maria left the stage, Judge Whittaker approached her, his smile genuine. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with respect. She smiled back, knowing that this was just the beginning. They had both taken the long road to understanding, but now, side by side, they were part of something much bigger. A community united in its commitment to justice, reconciliation, and hope. And together, they would continue to walk that path, one step at a time.